Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining us, wherever you are in the world. I'm honored to welcome you to the last session of our TDK Ventures Energy Week 2021 conference, covering topics related to energy transformation, or EX. For those of you who joined the previous sessions from Monday to Thursday, welcome back. My name is Katherine He. I'm an investment analyst with TDK Ventures, the corporate venture capital arm of the Japanese electronic giant TDK Corporation. We care deeply about energy transformation and have made 18 investments in deep tech companies in a little more than 2 years. Many of them are in energy, mobility, and material science space, all relevant to energy transformation. Today, I will be the moderator for our 5th session about mining and battery recycling. Like previous sessions, we gathered leading experts from academia and industry with experienced VCs to discuss the entire battery life cycle from lithium mining to battery material recycling with a full spectrum of battery supply chain. Now, let me proudly introduce our amazing panelists for today's session. Our first panelist is Amanda Hall, the founder and CEO of Summit Nanotech. Summit Nanotech is leading the breakthroughs in nanotechnology to deliver a clean and green lithium extraction for the industry. Welcome, Amanda. Our second panelist is Professor Zheng Chen from UCSD and co-founder of Unigrid, who's leveraging new battery chemistries to provide low-cost, safe, long-lasting, and recyclable energy storage solutions. Zheng, welcome on board. Our third panelist is Laurie Menoud, the partner at L1 Ventures. Laurie and her team focus on finding, funding, and growing teams that catalyze planet-positive industries. We're delighted to have you, Laurie. Our fourth panelist is Ajay Kachhar, the president, CEO, and co-founder at Li-Cycle. Li-Cycle is a clean tech company with revolutionary technology for resource recovery of end-of-life lithium-ion batteries, and is the first public listed startup working on battery recycling. Congrats, Ajay, and welcome.
Great.
Our fifth panelist is Alex Grant, the principal at Jadco Partners, co-founder of Lilac Solutions, also a research affiliate at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Besides, Alex is a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree in this year in energy sector. Welcome on board, Alex. Last but not least, our final panelist is Michael O'Cronley, CEO and board member at Battery Resources, a fast-growing startup that's developing a closed-loop approach on recycling and providing premium battery materials back to the manufacturing. Welcome to join us, Michael. We are so happy to have all these distinguished guests to join us. Now, let me briefly introduce our event agenda. Like the previous sessions, we will start from a short background introduction of challenges and solutions in mining and battery recycling sector. And then we'll have our roundtable discussion with 2 key questions and voting interactions with our audience. After that, we'll leave 30 minutes for Q&A to finish our session. For the main part, we will be focusing our discussion of mining and battery recycling around 2 key questions shown on the screen. The first one is, what is the most impactful innovation that can be realized in the next 5 years? And the second question is, what is the most challenging innovation but will disrupt the market in the coming 10 years? We will collect answers from our panel guests, have a thorough roundtable discussion, and then we will invite you, our audience, to join the poll. Our hope is to have a spirited discussion with diverse opinions, maybe even contrarian views, to uncover what cutting-edge technologies, trends, and innovations the energy industry should be paying attention to. We love to hear different voices from people with different backgrounds. So our audience, please have your cell phone ready to join the voting. We hope to hear from you and collect your opinions regarding the key topics that we'll discuss today. Now, I'd love to give our general audience a brief introduction of today's topics and background. To achieve the global goal towards mitigating climate change and advancing social justice, the industry is pushed to develop an equitable, sustainable supply chain, from raw materials production to end-of-life recycling. The fast-growing EV market significantly enhanced the demand for battery-grade metals such as cobalt and lithium. The implementation of stringent government regulations to minimize environmental hazard associated with the disposal of batteries is also providing a boost to this market. With the drive of this need and challenges ahead, we see growing market and emerging technologies showed on the screen. However, what we showed are just part of the topics to start with. I believe our guests have a lot to share. Now, let's start with our first big topic today. What do you think is the most impactful innovation in mining and recycling that can be realized in the coming next 5 years? Our dear panelists, please find the link in the chat at the right-hand side of your screen and click through to submit your answer. We hope you can give a keywords or short phrase to answer these questions. Your answer will pop up on the screen so all of our audience can see it. All right. I think right now we have our answers all collected from our panelists. Yeah, I'm actually very interested in the cross-supply chain with the partners. Whoever contributed this answer, would you like to elaborate more and help us to explain what that means and why it is important?
Yeah, it was me. And obviously I didn't get the memo on short answers, so I was very verbose there. Yeah, look, I'll share my perspective on this and be good to hear from the other panelists too. The lithium-ion battery supply chain is very complicated. And there are many different nodes that go in ultimately to making a cell. And I think for some of the folks in the audience, you may be familiar with this, others may not be. And it's been very encouraging. Say in the last 2 weeks, there's been approximately 140 gigawatt hours of lithium-ion battery cell manufacturing added in North America. That number keeps growing, and that keeps happening all around the world. But I would actually almost say that it's a little backwards, where those commitments are sometimes coming ahead of the critical steps in between, where you go to something called precursor and cathode, which ultimately goes right back into a new lithium-ion battery. So why I highlighted cross-supply chain partnerships can be closed loop in nature. That's what's needed here. I think from our perspective, this is a life cycle vantage point, my vantage point as well, that this is not something you can go alone, full cycle. You need to be partnering cross-supply chain. And this has different skill sets that come in along the chain from metallurgy all the way to manufacturing. And so I think that's very important to enable the growth and the transition to this revolution in the coming 5 years. And without that, I think there's risk. So that's why I highlighted that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good input. Can you tell us more? What is the cross-supply chain? Does that also include, for example, Amanda, she's providing green lithium extraction technology. Does it mean that the battery recycling company also need to work with these virgin material providers?
Yeah, man, it's Ajay. I think from my perspective, it plays in a couple of ways. I'll use a couple of case studies. So one is, obviously very topical today, and this is a ton of worry from the supply chain participants is around securing critical materials. Okay, so everyone is very focused now on, and it should have been all along for those of us that come from the primary side of this, have been seeing this. That's my original background, is from making lithium in a primary context. But I think that's one node where you have cathode companies, cell companies, auto companies, are all looking to get secure supply of lithium, nickel, cobalt. Well, how can you enable that? Well, you need the supply chain to be working cross nodes in terms of each of those boxes, all the way from the primary side to the actual ultimate making of the battery cells together. And from a recycling perspective, say life cycle perspective, certainly for us, we need to be coexisting with primary material, virgin material, and recycled material, but targeting the optimal economic and environmental efficiency. So that's what I mean is it's interesting in a way. It's quite all over the place. Try to put it that way. You have different parts of the supply chain that are trying to each solve this, sometimes in their own node, but it's growing and it's changing. And I think there's a systems view that is coming in because it's a necessity. For any of these targets to be met, it has to be done in concert from right from the mine and the refinery all the way to the manufacturing and incorporating recycling for a closed loop.
Thank you, Mike. I saw, thank you, Ajay. I saw Mike is nodding his head. Mike, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to totally agree with Ajay here that partnerships are really key to this as we build out this industry, and the tremendous amount of investment that's going into battery production, really to feed the automotive industry and also to feed the electric grid industry. It needs batteries, and a lot of batteries, and so a lot of investment has been announced. What hasn't yet happened is the investment that's needed in the supply chain. Where are all these critical materials going to come from? And I think that's what we're going to be talking about today. And how do you do that efficiently, and how do you do that sustainably? It's something that needs to grow. And I think what we'll see over the next 5 years or so is you'll see a lot of partnerships develop. And so that's something that's going to be critical. So it's not just a battery manufacturer. They need suppliers. They need partners that are going to help supply them these critical materials. And so yes, they already have some established supply chain partners, cathode manufacturers. They have foil manufacturers and things that are supplying them, but they don't necessarily exist in the United States. They're to a large extent don't really exist in Europe. It's starting to build. And that's something you'll see happening more and more in the coming years. And along with what Ajay said, is recycling is going to be a piece of that. It's going to be part of the supply chain. You have to have that end of life piece. You have to have that the piece that can handle and process battery material, and then also return those materials back into the battery supply chain at some point, at some level. And so at Battery Resources, we focus on the high value materials, specifically the cathode materials and also the anode materials, not some of the intermediates. But there's going to be it's going to be a big space, and there's going to be room for lots of evolution here. But underpinning a lot of that, you will see a lot of partnerships forming.
Speaking of the partners, looking at so many different participants in this whole system, Alex, I guess you must have some understanding, based on your very abundant experience on dealing with different entities in the system. Do you have anything that you want to bring up to the table, share with our audience?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see Redwood Materials building lithium mines, processing natural resources someday. I'm just speculating. I don't know if that will actually happen. But what I'm trying to say in joke form is that we have to reduce the entropy of a very large number of lithium, nickel, cobalt, et cetera, atoms from natural resources in the next 10 years before recycling really matters. And the way that we do that is really important to make sure that the transition kind of happens smoothly and we achieve something like a just transition, both kind of socially and environmentally. So I think that right now there being a lot of focus on kind of novel approaches for making lithium and other battery chemicals from natural resources is really exciting and important. And I'm glad I'm glad that there's kind of a big portfolio of recycling approaches going on as well, because they'll be 100% necessary very soon. I mean, they really already are. And yeah, so my point of view is that probably the battery manufacturers or cathode manufacturers left standing in 2020, 2030 or something like this are the ones who build strong relationships with their suppliers and help them succeed as well, because you cannot make a cathode without the precursors for making the cathode. It's just not possible. And those materials need to come from somewhere. So like relationships up and down the supply chain are super important. And especially if like a battery or a battery company or an OEM wants to hit sustainability goals, it'll be virtually impossible to hit, embodied CO2 emission targets and things like this without some kind of tinkering in the supply chain and being a part of natural resource projects.
Yeah. Thanks for the input. Yeah.
Hey,
so,
Katherine, if I could just add something onto what Alex just said, I guess what I run into a lot is a little bit of a misnomer or a misunderstanding of what recycling is and when this is actually going to happen. Recycling is a process that actually needs to happen now. This is not something that's going to happen in 10 years when all of these EVs reach their end of life. It's happening right now, and these partnerships that AJ and I had talked about, they're forming now because of what is happening on the manufacturing scrap side. Each one of these gigafactories that are being announced is going to have a partner that is going to process all of their manufacturing scrap. One of these gigafactories is going to produce tens of kilotons of material that needs to be processed and needs to be put right back into the supply chain. They're building these gigafactories now, and they need a processor. They need a partner that is going to help them return these materials back in the supply chain. So this is, and even when you look at the forecast for the next decade or so, the largest source of material is going to come from these gigafactories. It won't necessarily be end-of-life vehicles, and that's probably one of the. I think there's a conception out there that this is a problem that we need to solve in the future. It's actually a problem we need to solve now, and that's why you're seeing a lot of investment that's going into the space. It's going into the recycling space. AJ, you and your company have had launched and gone public this year, largely because it's recognized it's something that's happening now. You look at what Redwood has recently done. We're in the process of doing the exact same thing. So it's something that's happening now.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. I think that's a spot on point. And you look at, for example, what we've done with GM and LG through Ultium, why that is there and why we're partnering with them is really focused on scrap. And I'd actually take it a step further, and this is what I meant by cross supply chain partnerships. So as you think about the need of critical materials, and just back to Alex's point, it is important to really have the two sources here. And I like that analogy, Alex, of reducing the entropy to get the atoms of lithium nickel that we need. It's a perfect way to say it. And that needs to happen. It needs to happen in an innovative and an as minimized of an environmental footprint as possible. So we should talk about that. And as you layer in 5 to 10%, and it's typically actually more in the ramp up years, of that material never actually makes its way into a battery. It makes its way into offcuts. And the analogy there is, imagine you have a foil for cathode, which is typically aluminum, and the cathode's being deposited, and something needs to be cut to size out of that. Just like making furniture or a leather bag, choose your analogy, you're going to get offcuts. So it's not only rejects, it's also it's yield loss, and it's just a reality. And I often get the question of, well, is that going to be engineered out long term? Of course, it's our desire to work with our customers to bring down the cost of EVs, bring down the cost of batteries. So over time, that scrap rate is going to have to be optimized, but it's also a reality vis-a-vis also quality. So as you have recalls and that nobody wants, there's a converse pressure on quality. So back to Mike's point, that is very much the first wave of material that needs to be dealt with. It is an order of magnitude more than anything that's been dealt with by the lithium-ion battery recycling market before, which has been traditionally kind of a generalized approach or fitting into legacy supply chains often. But we can't lose sight of, and the last point I wanted to make is, once those materials are into a pack, and this is what Alex was talking about, that is by math an order of magnitude more than, of course, than the scrap that came in. And again, that scale is, we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. We deal with auto recyclers that are doing 2,000 vehicles a day. Okay, so obviously EVs being the majority of that is a ways away, but in terms of current capability and technology to deal with that, it's a ways away. So we're working on that, we're addressing it cross supply chain. But what that all needs is then a systems view. And why this matters, lastly, and then I'll pause here, is CO2 footprint, an environmental footprint of the battery and the associated cost. The way to strategize in large part, in addition to much better virgin extraction methods, is introducing a larger recycled portion. You can't really do that if you don't have enough atoms from virgin to begin with. It can't become the majority. You need to get them out of the ground, so it can be a portion that's going to grow. But for the future, we have to be prepared for that as well. So that's kind of a near-term and a long-term perspective.
Maybe just to add on what Ajay was just saying around environmental impact. So yeah, cross supply chain partnership, it's happening right now. And I think that's also great because it's going to reduce, for example, transportation and the impact on transportation on the environment. What I'm really interested about is kind of the next wave. After you have those cross supply chain partnerships in place, vertical integration. So we might see in the future some consolidation of players in the sector. There are also companies working today on technologies that are vertically integrated, where you reduce and you remove, you eliminate reprocessing steps. And therefore, you also eliminate transportation. And therefore, your unit economics and your environmental economics are superior, and it's an incentive for the customers then to use recycled materials instead of virgin metals. And I'm really excited to see that happen in the future. And I think in the next 5 years, we are going to see that being commercialized.
Just to jump in, Laurie, it's actually a common myth that transport of chemical products is a major driver of CO2 emissions. It's more the reagents and energy that goes into manufacturing them. I used to say that transport mattered 2 years ago before I started doing life cycle assessment on battery chemical manufacturing. But now I've come to realize that it's actually almost insignificant because transportation is actually pretty optimized. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. It's helpful.
You still have kind of reprocessing steps when you end at kind of black mass stage. To get into a kind of new cathode materials, you need to have a bunch of different processing steps, which are kind of adding to the kind of CO2 footprint. So I think also technologies that are vertically integrated, starting from the spent lithium-ion batteries directly to cathode active materials, are quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, to echo on Alex's point, I guess that's what you're getting. Maybe to unpack that a little bit. What you were talking about is perhaps the reagents as input, and then the CO2 footprint is part of those. Just be good to unpack that a little bit. Yeah.
So when you calculate the global warming potential or CO2 intensity of a chemical product or any product or kilowatt hour of storage, whatever have you, everything that goes into the manufacturing process of how that product is made is incorporated into the CO2 accounting. So that includes reagents used for performing separations or purifications. That includes obviously energy used for removing water from a stream or processing these materials in different ways, and it includes transportation as well. But typically, for natural resource projects, at least transportation is usually less than 5%. In a battery recycling context, it's probably a bit more. Like it's probably on the 10% order of magnitude, but it's still like almost negligible when you compare it to the energy and materials that are put into that process. Because even though you're recycling material, you're still using reagents to separate the metals in the black mass or any other component. So the way that all those things are made, it's a huge driver of emissions typically.
Yeah. Speaking of materials, I guess I want to poke Zheng out to talk more about how to generate and synthesize materials in a more green and low carbon way. I believe you have a lot of research done in this field.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Katherine. I think, yeah. First of all, I want to see that the cross supply chain is something I don't have much experience, but I totally agree with the perspective in the landscape on the cooperation crossing different sectors. But to my point, I think I just only focus more on the real technology, because the entire recycling, I think recycling field is probably going to be no more difference with the primary manufacturing. People have already done many years. If we don't have a good solution to do separation, I think the key is the separation. Because the following, if you have all the precursors, everyone basically these top tier manufacturers, the cathode anode manufacturers, they can do much better job than us if we do the same thing, because they have built a lot of experience. So the solution that recyclers should provide is definitely the advanced separation technology. That's my just a personal opinion, because if we don't do this, those primary manufacturers, they're going to do this. And we do see a lot of manufacturers, cathode manufacturers, they are investing significant portion of their kind of budget or money into the recycling field as well. How we are going to compete as recyclers, right? So I think one thing in the business model, there's going to be a lot of creativity, which I do not have any experience as well. But from technical point of view, as a recycling person in the field, I think what we really care about is how to really contribute to the novel solution and the technology to go beyond traditional primary manufacturing. So that's the key. I think the only difference is the precursor, is the feedstock, right? The only feedstock that the primary manufacturing are using is the mines, the minerals. But as a recyclers, we are using battery as a feedstock. And then the following step is going to be something primary manufacturers can do as well. So the key is that, come back to my point, how to separate the batteries in an efficient way to make sure we do not generate extra waste, to make sure everything is safe and green and really a low cost. I think that is something I think for the developer, recycling developer, we should probably definitely focus beyond the business model. Yeah.
Yeah, 150% agree with that. I know some of our fellow panelists here probably don't, so feel free to debate. But from my perspective, I 150% agree. And I think what's going to be challenging here for the recycling market, and again, it'd be good if we should probably get to the primary part of this as well for mining, but from a recycling perspective, one of the biggest challenges, and I can tell you with us operating, taking thousands of tons and getting to tens of thousands of tons per year of batteries, is totally variable. Like we're getting everything and anything and any type of lithium battery chemistry you can imagine, we're seeing it. And so that's the challenge, right? And I would agree there. It's really then about separation and how do you get back to the fundamental building blocks. At the same time, keeping the systems view, because at the end of the day, we're trying to shorten the steps back into the battery. But there, of course, from my perspective, there's, of course, players that are very in depth in that, and that's quite a different business from my perspective. But happy to debate if there's other perspectives.
Yeah, I'll add into this that if you recycle anything, any type of material, that is, if you're looking at it from a CO2 perspective, it's better. It just is. You don't have to pull this material out of the ground. You don't have to further refine it. You don't. In the case of most battery materials today, they're mined from all corners of the world. They're pulled out of the ground. The majority of them are shipped to China for refinement. And then if you look at even cathode material, then it needs to go to a cathode. These refined metals need to then go to a cathode precursor manufacturer, and then it gets shipped to a cathode manufacturer, and then it gets shipped to a battery manufacturer, and then it gets shipped to the vehicle OEM. There's a lot of movement of this material, and Alex, I know you've looked at a lot of life cycle analysis. We've looked at it as well. When our primary output product is cathode material, and when we do a life cycle analysis on our cathode material produced from recycled feedstock, and we compare it to cathode material that's produced from mine sources, there's a dramatic reduction in CO2. It's on the order of 90% right now. And we have a roadmap to actually make cathode material that's net carbon neutral. And so that it's huge. you get a lot of credit and offsets for just plain recycling. But the fact that you are starting with a very, very concentrated material. So the lithium extraction, yes, we're going to need to do it. The problem with lithium, and it's everywhere, it's not concentrated. When you do the recycling or your urban mining, you're starting with a very, very concentrated source. And that is also, it results in much lower CO2 emissions. So, as this battery industry is growing, and as there's a greater need for all of these materials, yes, we are going to have to pull it out of the ground. We've been harvesting materials, since really the dawn of man, and that's going to continue. We're just now harvesting things like lithium and nickel and cobalt in much larger degrees. So that's going to continue just as long as the battery industry is going to continue to grow. But if you want to do it in a more sustainable and CO2 neutral way, you've got to, recycling is really the way that you're going to be producing it at a much lower, with a much lower carbon footprint.
Yeah, glad to see so many efforts has been done in the recycling field. I'd love to hear from Amanda about how you look at, in a greener, more sustainable way, the mining industry.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying, actually, although I'd love to get Alex's input on the statements about LCA analysis of batteries, recycling versus raw mining, given all of the new technologies that are being entered into the mining sector right now. But as a leader in my company, I tell my team all the time that although we're extracting from the ground today, our goal is to put ourselves out of business and eventually get into the recycling space, because we see that need in the future. So what we're trying to do is bring a really green, sustainable extraction process to the market, and then fill up the circular economy so that it can maintain itself. And then we're going to switch all of our technologies over to the recycling space in about 10 years. So these things just take time, right? Like, it takes time to scale. It takes time to prove the safety behind all of the different new technologies and new battery recycling methodologies, and making sure that it's done right, because the last thing we want to do is rush and make mistakes and make it worse. And that's something historically humans do. So we have to put a lot of wisdom into the way we transition from raw material refining or raw material processing into a complete total recycling future. But yeah, these things just take time. But I'm excited about the future of recycling. But in the short term, we have a lot of mining to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to see like both the mining industry and recycling industry are making efforts to make it more green. So any thoughts from the panel? I see we have one answer from our panelists saying sustainable high value battery materials. What is the key point to make sure that we are generating high value battery materials while still keep a low carbon emission? Any secret there?
Yeah. So Catherine, that was my response. So we are focused on high value materials. So if you look at the recycling industry as it has been, in the last several years, what exactly is recycling? That typically meant a collection of batteries. Could be consumer electronics. Maybe it's some early end of life vehicles or something, but more or less they would be thrown into a smelter, or they would be shredded into something called black mass, and then really it would be exported from the United States. There really wasn't any capability or capacity in the U.S. Call it 2 years ago to really even process any of this black mass. So it was either exported to Canada, Europe, or Japan, Korea. Now things are changing, and that's newer technologies are coming where you can actually extract the metals, the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium out of that. That's higher value. But you can even go a step further than that. And rather than taking the time and effort to extract these metals and separate them, you could go all the way and keep them together and formulate brand new cathode material, which is much, much higher value. And so when you get into a situation where you're looking to recycle, and you're looking to recycle with a partner, that partner has got to be able to extract the most value out of that feedstock. And if you're just doing a very simple practice, something like shredding, and you bring in batteries and you shred and you generate black mass and you generate revenue from that, that's a business that generates very thin margins, I'll say. A lot of times, at least in the past, it required a recycling fee So if you had batteries and you were selling them, or you had to get rid of them, you would actually have to pay a fee a couple of years ago for someone to take them and process them. And that more or less is going away because newer technologies are coming to extract the metals out of it or to generate new high value engineered materials out of it. So what you're going to see going forward here as the newer technologies come online and are building out capacity. Battery Resources is building commercial scale capacity now, but and I know Li-Cycle is doing the same as well as Redwood. So you're going to have much more capacity that's available in the market. And so what is going to happen is the price that will be paid for these batteries or to acquire the batteries is going to increase. And so anybody that's practicing a very simple recycling method, such as shredding or just a pyrometallurgical process where they smelt these batteries, they're not going to be able to extract enough value out of this feedstock to more or less compete for the feedstock. You've got to have the technology. You've got to be able to produce these high value materials because that's really going to drive the whole market. And it's going to be a little more transformative. And why that's important for really the whole ecosystem is now recycling has an economic driver behind it. Someone is willing to pay for this feedstock. So now if you have spent batteries or you have scrap material, someone's going to pay for it because there's valuable nickel and cobalt and lithium and all these types of things in it. And so the marketplace is changing. It's changing now, and it's because of the technology that's being introduced right now.
Yeah, actually, I want to challenge Mike or other panelists. Speaking of value, we talk about nickel, cobalt, but right now we're actually seeing more and more much cheaper materials like LFP. We just saw Tesla claim that they'll very, massively deploy LFP in their future Tesla cars. So yeah, I want to hear from our panelists on how does that work with different chemistry systems?
I can take that and I'll turn it over to others, but LFP does not contain the very valuable or expensive cobalt and nickel, and that's why it's actually being introduced into the market. Because if you look at a dollars per kilowatt hour basis, it's one of the most attractive chemistries to put in perhaps some of your base vehicles or applications that don't need very high energy density. So LFP has been around for a long time. I was previously with A123 Systems, big LFP company. And so it's a very good, stable, safe cathode material. It just wasn't very energy dense. And so when there was this drive to have high energy density applications, it sort of fell out of favor for a while. But now they've improved the energy density enough, so it's starting to come back in. And you see companies like Volkswagen and Tesla and Ford all putting LFP on their roadmaps. So it will be a bigger part of the market. But now we're going to have to be able to handle this. We're going to have to be able to process it. And how do you get value out of it without the valuable cobalt and nickel in there? Sure, there's lithium, but is that enough? And so at Battery Resources, we've recently patented some technology to selectively extract out the lithium at very high battery grade. And we've been able to, with the price of lithium, and it depends on lithium if you can make it positive, but if it's over around $12 a kilogram, we can make it a positive business case, so we do not have to charge customers to take their LFP batteries. And so that's essentially, again, technology that's allowing us to drive the market, to drive increased recycling rates.
Yeah, and I would just weigh in there, and it's been interesting to watch the chemistry ping-ponging the last couple of years. And I think the reality is we're going to see a mix of many different chemistries. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in the zeitgeist you hear binary pronouncements, and things are not binary. There are numerous chemistries for numerous different types of applications. But with some of the innovations in LFP, as Mike was talking about, it is attractive for obviously some segment of products. So, just to go a little deeper on that one and to add from our perspective, it's interesting in places within China and also Asia more broadly, where you've had historically a lot of LFP, there has really been no convergence around the style of recycling. And so you sometimes see LFP intermediate, so pre-treated the same way that other pre-treatment occurs in Asia, maybe broadly speaking, which is a little different in China and Japan, Korea, depending on the party. But It's gone into an intermediate material, which is the family of generally black mass, and black mass is obviously quite different party to party. However, where that's been making its way into is it's variable. So we've seen some cases where it's going into lithium conversion flow sheets, so akin to a spodumene conversion flow sheet, which is interesting. That's really not optimal. We've seen some other approaches where other people are trying different things. So the bottom line is it hasn't really converged in terms of how that is intended to be treated. And at the same time, you have this huge driver of more lithium iron phosphate, not only in Asian context, but globally in different countries and different companies. So we similarly have been very focused on this. I would say, generally speaking, in the recycling community, there's been a lot of aversion to LFP. Many go so far to say they just don't take it.
Mm-hmm.
We do. And I think that's very important because full life cycle of the vehicle, if you're going to have a liability at the end of the day due to this chemistry, that doesn't really help because the cost is going to be borne somewhere. So we similarly are focused on lithium carbonate recovery from LFP. We've done that over the past couple of years and can feed it into our system. It makes sense economically at a range of lithium carbonate prices.
Good. Yeah, I think we have taken a good dive into kind of new near-term innovations and their implications. I also see we have answers of radical reclamation. Because of time, let's shift our topic to our next question. What do you think is the most challenging technology but will disrupt the market in the coming 10 years in mining and battery recycling? All of our guests, please again put your answer using the link that you receive in your chat box, and then your answer will pop up on the screen. And then speaking back to the radical reclamation, I would love to invite Amanda to elaborate more after we finish this poll. We are going to close our session soon. Close our voting session. Nice, time is up. Thank you so much once again for the thoughtful answers. And then now let's get on to another round of panel discussion on our second question. So I saw deep sea mining. I actually want to discuss this together with our one topic that we haven't got a chance to discuss, which is radical reclamation. So Laurie and Amanda, would you like to start?
I'll speak to radical reclamation. So I think we've got the technologies in place and the access to renewable energy that allows us to go to our waste, our problematic waste streams coming out of a mining operation or a battery recycling operation, and take the waste and turn it into product, and then put the ground back to the way we found it or better. And so from my perspective, like we can now go into tailings ponds and pull out valuable metals and minerals, throw them into the circular economy, and then reclaim the land, put everything back underground where we got it from, and reclaim the land, plant trees, and make it better than we found it. So for me, that's something that's doable today. Like we could start doing this today. And then from a longer term perspective, it's something we should make sure is built into our higher level systems of extracting and just making sure we have zero waste. Always pull as much product as we can out of a waste stream, and then make sure we put everything back better.
Thanks for the input, Amanda. Laurie, do you want to comment on that, on mining and especially deep sea mining?
So yeah, I guess two different topics, but I agree with what Amanda just said, and also making sure that once we are done with mining, we are restoring ecosystem on all mines. We are planting trees again. We are kind of bringing back the vegetation and the biodiversity, I think, is critical. But yeah, let's talk about deep sea mining. I mean, as an investor investing in very early stage stuff, sometimes I see some really interesting ideas. And when you look at the kind of global demand for EV batteries, it's going to explode in the next 10 years. And so the solution, it's either we recycle the metal, or we use less metals in batteries, or we find new sources of metals. And that's where deep sea mining comes into play as a way to find new sources for metal. So it could be something that disrupts the mining industry as we know it today, But at the same time, there are lots of challenges related to this new approach, including environmental challenges. And so maybe for the audience and for people who don't know about deep sea mining, so basically you can find in some specific areas in the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, at the bottom of the ocean, what's called polymetallic nodules, which are basically small rocks of roughly this size that contain very high content of EV battery metals. And basically, if you just look at the zone between Hawaii and the Mexican coast, in this particular zone, there are actually more content of cobalt, manganese, and nickel that's what's found on land today. So the opportunity is huge. And because those little rocks are just sitting on the bottom of the ocean, you don't need extraction to pick up those little rocks. There is an opportunity to have an industry that is going to be 90% less in terms of carbon footprint compared to land mining. So huge opportunity. At the same time, in the deep sea, there are vast, I would say, array of ecosystems and lots of life that we've barely begun to study. And we know that deep sea minings are going to use very kind of huge robotic system between 20 to 30 tons. And we know that it's going to basically wipe off entire ecosystems that are found down there. And so right now there is a call for a moratorium around deep sea mining. Companies like Google or BMW are pushing to try to stop this industry. But at the same time, lots of investor interest. There are new companies that are popping up trying to develop those robotic systems to start collecting those polymetallic nodules. And just this year, Deep Green, which is an early stage company in the space, did a SPAC at multiple billions of dollars. So we might see deep sea mining coming in the next 10 years. And I think it's an interesting topic because quite controversial.
That's a very interesting share. I didn't know Google is doing that as well. I do love to hear back from Alex and also Amanda regarding mining industry. So who are the players there? And then who are the, can you let us know about, for example, deep sea mining, or even we can be even more wilder, go to outer space. So who are the key players and what are the key metrics on the lithium mining or key materials?
As a geophysicist, I think it's a terrible idea. The logistics alone are kind of absurd about trying to do stuff like this underwater. And we have looked into it. We've looked into using our technology underwater, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm interested to see how this SPAC got launched and what kind of economic metrics they use to convince the public that this was a good idea. So that's just my personal opinion. As a geophysicist, I feel like I'm a steward of the earth, and I would never want to see that happen at the bottom of the ocean. That's my personal belief.
As a scientist, I also agree. I would rather we do mining in the Mars instead of doing in the backyard of the ocean. I think, in the other hand, we have to do a lot of work because moving everything, you need to pay electrons. Electrons will also give CO2. I think I don't have any kind of data on the LCA or TEA analysis, but to me, to my personal perspective, yeah, I would say the backyard should be reserved. Yeah.
Laurie, so you see we have challenges here.
Mining. I'm against it as well. And Google actually is not doing deep sea mining. They are just calling for a moratorium on banning, really to ban deep sea mining. So there are many companies that are against this new industry being developed. But yeah, at the same time, I think it's going to be interesting to see the next 10 years. Amanda, to your point, it needs to make sense from a unit economics perspective. But those companies are claiming that they are going to be cheaper than land mining. Because basically, again, those little rocks are just sitting on the bottom of the ocean. No need for extraction. So it's let's see. Not excited by that neither.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting space to watch. That's for sure.
Yeah, very mind-opening. Yeah, let's see. We also saw answers coming out of our guests saying waste-free manufacturing. This will be a big topic for the next coming 10 years. Wonder, any comments on this waste-free manufacturing?
Yeah, I proposed this point. I just want to iterate the waste-free manufacturing or remanufacturing, which is definitely associated with our recycling topic. Because I think one of the biggest reasons that driving recycling is the economic return, right? And then here in California, we are not allowed to build a battery recycling facility, which is due to a lot of reasons. Basically, one is the waste, or following one, similar one is the environmental impact. So we are talking about recycling high-value materials, cathode, anode, which was, of course, is the first task we have to do in terms of recycling. But in the battery, they are less, but the same order of magnitude of other materials, such as electrolyte, the fluorine-containing binders, polymer binders, and other low-value carbon black, 1 or 2%, or even less. So these materials adding together, if we're going to treat tons or million tons of waste batteries, they're going to be in a very big scale. And then are they going to be the waste, or what kind of a solution we are going to do to treat them or to return the value without generating unnecessary waste? I think for now, probably we do not think too much. I think someone probably also have been thinking about this. But for me, I just want to kind of propose this topic so that maybe the panelists can share some further insights to basically provide some discussion opportunity.
Yeah, I can start. And it's an interesting one, I think, from an economics perspective, because, and I'll tell you, our approach of doing things, and this comes from metallurgical flow sheet design 101. You have to be careful to always balance. There's two competing things here. One is, okay, what's practical? What should you go to? You can't do too many things at once necessarily. And there's process scale up reality when you build, large hydrometallurgical plants. And that's a traditional 101 lesson that gets drilled into your head in a plant is don't try to do too many things at once. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, and to build on your point, which is a very good question, is from a recycling perspective, so using metallurgy in a recycling context or resource recovery context, you have metrics like recycling efficiency rate, RER. So RER is a measure of how much mass comes into the process, what's produced as product, and what returns to the economy. So that has been around. It's a legislated quantity. In the battery directive in the EU, it's still under discussion, but that could be as high as 65, 70%. So to your point, you may have components that are electrolyte, you have to include the solvent. You have the salt, you also have the solvent. So maybe 10% maybe of the input. So if you're not recovering those things and it doesn't come out in a product and goes back to the economy, it can't be counted as part of your RER. So these are the two competing tension points. Our approach has been, practically find ways to get to a product that makes sense to go back to the economy to start, but still trying to balance a trade-off study of, okay, how far should you go when, and process complexity, right? Already coming in as a polymetallic. We're talking about deep sea mining. These are polymetallic. That's a different context, which, by the way, I vigorously disagree with. That's a silly idea, but I won't go into that. But just in this context for recycling, it's a challenge. It's a challenge because you have an economic tension and you have a RER tension. So we're constantly innovating, but it has been traditionally an issue.
I think renewable energy is going to be a game changer in this space, because what used to be not necessarily uneconomic, but sometimes in the old days, you would spend more greenhouse gas emissions trying to recycle or recover waste and get it back into your system than you would save to just throw it out into the landfill. But with renewable energy, this is changing the game. Like, it's giving us an opportunity to take waste and recycle it without having to spend more greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's a good opportunity that's going to come. It'll become a lot more fluid in the future with renewables supporting.
Yep. To follow on that, Amanda, I think what you're seeing with many different commodities and products is you're seeing improved ways of recycling, more efficient ways of recycling. And it's not just with battery materials, it's with lots of materials. There's lots of investment in companies coming out with new ways to recycle plastic to make it more economic. And really that's what we need. And so that's certainly happening in the battery recycling space. And that's going to help drive lower CO2.
Very thorough discussions on this. I think it's kind of tap another answers coming out of our panel, which is closed loop circular economy. Anyone from our panelists could help us to understand more about what is closed loop circular economy and why it matters and how we can make it better.
That was my comment, and it should be a sphere, not a loop. And just to something AJ said earlier, it's messy. Like the supply chain and the connectivity between all the different functioning pieces of an energy future in terms of batteries and energy storage, it's messy. And so we need to connect them all into this beautiful sphere and close it so that we all work together and have different materials moving around that sphere in a closed system. And I think it's achievable, but it's going to take a lot of effort. And we just have to be not afraid to put that effort in to make it a closed economy. But it's exciting. It's just going to be a huge challenge in the future to collaborate in the right ways to get that to happen.
So Amanda, who you want to most to collaborate with?
Well, I'll give you a quick example. So we can take lithium out of a lithium-ion battery that is recycled from an LFP type battery, but then we turn it into a material that goes into an NMC battery. So now we've got material coming out of one battery form and into another. And that requires, more of a spider web of connection than just one partnership. It's multiple partnerships. So a lot of collaboration and a lot of just like agreeing to support each other in the system.
This is cool. Yeah, I see there's many, after our panel discussion today, we can, all exchange our needs and then help from each other. I guess there will be a lot of collaborations and partnerships built up out of our panel. Next, let's have some discussion about development of resourcing versus manufacturing. I think we kind of touched this in our first discussion, but I want to ask more from our panelists. How do you see the competition among these two?
Yeah, and it was mine, and actually it was more about the incongruency of the pace of development associated. And what I meant by that is, and actually it might be good Alex can chime in here because I'm sure he looks at this across different parts of the supply chain. But to scale up a battery mega factory, battery cell factory, even recycling, it's not easy. These are large capital projects, and battery cell making is both chemical and mechanical in nature, so it's not easy. But at the same time, the lead time to do that doesn't involve exploration, and so you're talking on the order of years, right? Like 3-5 years, that sort of level. On the other end of the spectrum, when you think about the critical materials that are needed to go into that, and if I just think about, for example, one time when I was back at Hatch, where I was before I started Life Cycle, we were working on the Rio Tinto Jadar project in Serbia, which is a lithium project. And I remember in 2012, 13, looking at a startup date, I think it was late 2010s. It was 2019, 20. So that's obviously a different context, and they've gone through a process there, and now they've committed the capital and they're going to get going. The point I'm trying to make is that lead time for development is very long. And from a exploration through to development of a metallurgical plant, it's a very long lead activity. This is often talked about. So those two things are incongruent, and who knows how it's going to play out in the next 5-10 years. But there is a tightness coming, and it is already there for these materials, and it's just a general topic, and others should probably weigh in there.
Yeah, AJ, I 100% agree, and my response was the reasonable cost of battery materials, and it goes right along with what you're saying. There's a timing difference of when it takes, the market is now taking off. We've hit this inflection point. There's becoming wide scale adoption EVs and a lot of launches and all of the investment in battery manufacturing, and that's measured in years. But the ability to find the resources and the materials and to extract them and to start these projects, these mining projects, could be upwards of a decade to really get going and permitted, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and the timing doesn't necessarily line up. And so anytime that you have a supply and demand that's out of whack and not in equilibrium, it's going to cause pricing issues. And we're already starting to see that right now, certainly with lithium. We're a little out of whack on our supply and demand. If you just even look back in history, we've had spikes in these commodities, these metals, over time with cobalt and then nickel, and eventually they settle themselves out. But we're going to continue to see these spikes, and if we're not able to figure out a way to introduce materials into the supply chain at the rate that they're going to be that they're demanded, then we're going to be upside down on cost. And really, what was really driving this whole transformation into EVs or grid scale storage, massive batteries on the grid, is really the cost of batteries has come down dramatically. And if we can't continue that glide path, we're going to end up with some problems. So I do think that we're going to see that multiple times in the next decade, but we need to be focused on more efficient ways of finding these materials, extracting them, as well, and doing it quicker rather than the decade timing that has been happening. And we also need to be more efficient with our recycling and our collection of materials, really to offset the amount of material that we need to pull out of the ground.
You're absolutely right, Mike. And I think efficiency and low-cost operations are the key words there. And what you're describing, that 10-year life cycle to get a mine operational, that's an old-fashioned mine. What we're doing is imagining the mine of the future. And so my company's building modular technology that goes out in a 9-month cycle to start extracting immediately. So we don't have to wait a decade to put pylons in the ground and spend $300 million to build a refinery. We've got these small little modules that go out one at a time to the field and start extraction right away. So this, to me, that's the mine of the future. And they're upgradable, they're adaptable, they're skid loadable, and they can move around. It's a much better concept for being able to transition into the supply needs to get demand to get the battery manufacturers what they need sooner rather than later.
That's a good share. Actually, I want to hear from Amanda. I think you mentioned a very good point, which is the lead time. I think a lot of the business, no matter in mining or recycling, it's all high upfront payment, long lead time. And I want to hear from Laurie, from your investor perspective. When you come to startups in this field, how you look at those kind of challenges they are facing?
Yeah, as a VC, then in perspective, those points that you just mentioned are critical, because a venture capital firm, basically we have a 10-year lifetime, meaning that when we make the investment, we have 10 years to grow the company and exit it through an acquisition or through a public offering. And sometimes we invest in a company after maybe 3 or 4 years we've launched our fund, so we don't have that much time. So from my perspective, new technologies that are developed with this type of timeline don't make sense. I'm not going to invest in a company which requires 10 years and billions of dollars to deploy either mining facilities or recycling facilities. So that's critical. And in addition to that, that's also, I will say, unit economics are really critical, because you can have something that is very easy to deploy and very quick to deploy, but at the same time, it needs to be at least at cost parity with the technologies that the customer are using today, or cheaper. And so I will say that's another criteria we look at when we screen those new technologies. How are you going to compare for the customers from a unit economics perspective?
Thank you, Laurie. I actually want to ping Zheng out of this, because Zheng, I know you have some breakthrough technologies in your lab, and then you're trying to commercialize. How do you look at this challenge you're facing, and then with Laurie's idea on this?
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. Yeah, I think from resource point of view or from mining point of view, I would see definitely I think the technology is still the key. From my background, we know I never talk about anything about the business because I don't know business. So the technology wise, I think for example, for the lithium particularly, there are many kind of discussions over long term or short term, and also here in California, we see quite a few news recently in the Salton Sea. People are trying to kind of scale up using geothermal technology to do lithium mining to provide kind of or create more resources, as well as Nevada. Talking about the Lithium Valley business, right? So I think from my understanding, traditional recovery is still dominating. There are a lot of new technologies. I think probably due to my limited knowledge, I think maybe what Amanda said, it can be a disruptive technology. We can apply this broadly from a wide range of resources. For what we are doing, actually, I think recycling is still the most challenging part in terms of resource developing, because those fields are pretty kind of having enough attention. There are more resources putting on that. There are not more business going on. The entire supply chain, they're putting effort together to create resources for everybody, because everybody needed more resources. But I think the second business is recycling. I think there's one critical question always talking about recycling in the lithium. So a lot of lithium is lost in the recycling, and maybe not anymore like battery resources. I know their technology can include everything in their secondary and in their following production. But still, in every perspective, if we treat a resource and maximize the recovery efficiency, is going to be the number one issue. I think the most important target. We want to pay attention. Otherwise, we spend so much effort identify a resource, and then we cannot fully maximize the value, and then that is going to be a big loss. So that's my addition to this topic.
Thanks, Jen. It's happy to see our industry is moving fast, and then we are getting more and more attention and collaborations, either mining and recycling. Now I think it's time to open up the floor to collect feedbacks on this discussion from audience. And then our audience, now it's your time to get your phone ready to scan the QR code. Or have your browser ready, because we'll send out a link to you as well. So scan your QR code. You will get up onto a page that asks which industry you belong to, because we try to see different people from academia, industry, startups. We want to see your different perspective on your voting results. By the way, it's very happy we got many different like deep sea mining, very mind-opening ideas from our investors, and key insights from entrepreneurs, early-stage entrepreneurs, like still from universities, and also more experienced entrepreneurs like Mike and Ajay. I love to have our today's discussion with different people with different backgrounds, putting up all together. All right, I believe our audience already scanned the QR code. Now you should be able to see the second page, which is asking you to vote on the answers on the first question. What do you think is the most impact technology that will be achieved in the coming 5 years? Great. I think we got a lot of answers from our audience. Very wonderful engagement. And then we will come back to this result just a minute later. But now let's move the voting to our question 2. Our audience, if you check your cell phone, you will see the second question, which is, what do you think is the most challenging but will disrupt the market in 10 years? Please finish this voting on your phone so that we can discuss the 2 results all together. All right, okay. Now our poll has closed. Thank you so much for our audience to get involved in this fun voting interactions. The results looks very amazing. Okay, now I want to bring back the voting results to our guest. Can we pull back our first voting results on the first question? Yeah, let's have a look at the voting results. Anything that surprised our panel guests, looking at our feedback from our audience?
Do I get a prize? No, I'm kidding.
It looks like your answer got a lot of votes, cross-supply chains.
Just joking.
And then many industry people agree on that.
Yeah, I think we talked about it in our session, but partnerships are certainly going to be key to developing a complete ecosystem to really make all of this work. And I think virtually every panelist talked about the importance of that. So I'm quite frankly not surprised.
Cool. It looks like we got a lot of votes from industry people on high efficiency separation. Does that mean it is really a pain point on current recycling industry?
I guess so. I guess so, because most of the chemical process is regarding separation. Everything probably is about a separation. Petroleum, drug, everything. You need a high purity product. So you cannot avoid separation. So a lot of energy or the cost is spent on separation. So if we can keep improving the separation efficiency, the cost and the CO2 footprint will go down. Because moving electrons, moving atoms, everything needs to pay electrons, right? Electrons need to associate with CO2 footprint. That's the very simple thermodynamics. So I don't want to be a geek, but that's the basic thermodynamics. Yeah. So, but that's the key.
Yeah, I guess I disagree with it a little bit. At the heart of the technology battery resources have, we don't separate out these atoms. We keep them all together. We remove the atoms that we don't want in cathode material, but the fundamental technology is to bring any mixed stream of batteries in without any separation at all, and then create cathode material out of it, high performing cathode material out of it. The key to doing that is just pulling the stuff out you don't want. So we don't go through the time, effort, and expense to separate out these materials.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely the big breakthrough if we can hold most of stuff in. But at the entire process, if we can avoid separation, that's definitely an important step. But there's always something you get cathode from anode, from black mass, separate carbon, binder, electrolyte. So this because the battery is a very complicated product, right? If we can minimize the separation, definitely that's a very important step. Yeah.
Love the debate here. Actually, I also have a question regarding about separation. How it comes to different chemistry materials. For example, right now we have more and more treatment on our material. We have coating. We have more different SEI layers might develop after the recycling. How do we treat with those separations? During the separation, how do we regenerate those materials?
Someone is talking about refurbishing, battery refurbishing without opening the battery and then make a battery can live for another 5 or 10 years. Yeah, that's the dream, but it's going to be technically, it's going to be very hard. So
yeah,
I think I don't have an answer or solution towards that. Unless you want to disrupt them and make them into the recycle stream and then use the minimum unit operation step to get the most value out. Otherwise, yeah, it's still need a lot of effort.
Yeah, and to weigh in from like a bulk processing perspective, when you have coatings that are a small weight percentage of the overall mix, like keep in mind, one thing I think just a general comment for me is folks think about the scale up of this industry, realize that at the end of the day, a lot of this is also separation, but it's also materials handling. And so you're dealing, when we think about 10 years forward, and we're obviously already there in our mindset, we're going to be dealing with an order of magnitude more tonnage. And so hence, if you have coatings, they're going to become a more volumetrically, like from a magnitude perspective, going to be more of the input. But from a percentage perspective, it's still not a huge element. So we have to be thoughtful about how does that impact the purity of the end products that we're going to, and being close to the battery innovation to make sure that we're apprised of that and keeping at the leading edge of additional innovation. But just keep that in mind, is I think for the audience, is that I would say this goes for cathode making. You talk about plants today, and they're talking about a couple 100,000 tons per year, maybe. Future need to be talking about million tons, 2 million tons. When we talk about recycling, we have 5-year targets that we've put out there, and these are in the tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands tons per year. Future is millions of tons. And so I think a big aspect of innovation here is also materials handling. And then when you think about these small components as well, how do you practically manage all these things from a business perspective as well, and a technical flow sheet perspective?
Great input. Let's move back to the voting results, because I see some of the topics might need more elaborations from our panelists. For example, radical reclamation. Amanda, do you want to educate more on this topic?
Yeah, I think everyone cares about reclamation, so I don't think it's a reflection of people's attitude towards putting the earth back to a better place. But I think where the mark gets missed is the technology that's needed in order to do that. So there's a lot of innovation in that space, and there's a lot of ways that we can do it better, do it more efficiently, more economically. And so to me, I just see that as a huge growth, or not a growth opportunity, a huge opportunity for the mining and resource extraction sector to embrace that notion of being responsible for the back end of operations and putting reclamation as something on their cash flow sheets that is an important part of the overall project economics for something. So it needs to be integrated into the full cycle economics of an operation.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, now let's move to our second voting results. Our event team can help us to bring the results back. There's a lot of interesting discussions. Want to know any of the results surprised our panelists?
So I'll go first, I guess, on this one. Waste-free manufacturing is obviously a big concern all across academia, industry, investors, whomever. So I think that is ultimately a goal, and as long as we've been making things, we're trying to reduce scrap rates. And so, yes, that'd be great to get there. We've been growing up this battery industry for some time, and I've been in the battery industry now for going on 11 years. Previous to that, I was always in the automotive industry, and we had typically very, very low scrap rates. A high scrap rate was 0.5%. And then I moved to the battery industry, and I was floored that people were talking about 10+% scrap rates. And that's the norm, that's the standard. But things have been changing so radically in the battery industry with respect to materials, with respect to assembly techniques and technologies and whatnot. The scrap rates have really not come down over the last decade. And we're talking massive amounts of batteries that are being made, really big industrial players, and they're still in the high single digits after doing this in large scale automotive style batteries. And so it's still up there even after a decade. And so will that come down? Yes. But I think it was said earlier that there's going to be a portion of at least the way we manufacture batteries today, and we'll probably be manufacturing that for at least the next 10 years, some in a similar type of process. There will be large amounts of material that either by design or some of these cutoffs that AJ was talking about, or just the natural fallout, that's still going to be present. Now, is it a goal? I mean, if you have any scrap that comes right off the bottom line, nobody wants that. And so I think there will be a lot of work that's happening to eliminate that. But I think for the foreseeable future, until there's more breakthrough technologies in manufacturing capabilities, it's going to continue to be there. So it's a great goal to minimize that.
Yeah, giga scrap is always a topic and a big issue to address for current industry. Want to kind of pin Alex. Alex, you look quiet and in the deep thinking mode. Well, how do you look at the results here?
Designing out waste production is not a new idea, right? The best, most mature processes are always flow-based processes. So the fact that a lot of waste is produced in battery manufacturing today is just a reflection of the fact that it's kind of new at that scale, right? Yeah, I guess that would be my feedback.
Thank you, Alex. Any other comments from our panelists regarding our voting results?
See some interest in deep sea mining.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think
Wait, does anyone like deep sea mining?
Seems to be on the left. There's 3 people, Alex. I'm just kidding. I'm singling you out, whoever that is. I'm sorry. It's not the intent.
Yeah,
I am in principle not opposed to deep sea mining, actually. And the reason why is that terrestrial mining has severe local impacts to people who live, near or above the deposits that are mined, and those are the most notorious and problematic impacts usually. And there's no choice being made between deep sea mining and no mining. There's a choice being made between deep sea mining and terrestrial mining, for the most part in Southeast Asia. And I think Southeast Asian forest ecosystems are precious. So by no means do I think that, the deep sea ecosystem is valueless, but and I'm not a marine biologist, so I'm not going to try to quantitatively compare the value or the amount of biomass on the deep sea versus the rainforest or whatever have you. But you will always have an impact, and based on Deep Green's LCA report that they published about a year ago, based on their process modeling, they relatively professionally quantified CO2 emission mitigation opportunities from their process compared to terrestrial mining, due to the mineralogy of the nodules and other things. So just to toss out deep sea mining before anything is actually done, I think is an error, because I think it's just a reaction against something that's new. And I don't have problems with new things. I just think they need to demonstrate themselves to be economic or to have tolerable environmental impacts. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what you're saying is it's a systems view. That's what you're saying. It's from a net impact relative to. Yeah.
You have to take a systems view, because that's how the world works. Like you can't. It's inappropriate to export impacts somewhere else and then claim that you have a low impact, right?
Of course.
It's called what's that called? Shifting the duty or something like this. People kind of call that. I forget what it's called, but yeah. So that's my pro deep sea mining perspective.
Yeah, I love to have these contrarian ideas and views from the topics. It's really wonderful. I mean, hearing from different voices. And now I think I'll take the last about 30 minutes to open the floor completely to our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to post your questions in the chat box in your live stream page. And then our team will help to deliver the question to our panelists. While we're waiting for the questions from the audience, I actually want to take the chance to ask our panelists one question that we haven't discussed yet, but I think is pretty important, which is the secondary utilization of batteries. How do our panelists looking at the second life of battery utilization?
I can start. This is always a controversial one. It's a good question.
Please.
Yeah, look. So I think if you think about the cascading, from a higher level, it's reduce, reuse, recycle that people learn in your primary school, right? So if you think from that hierarchy, I think reusing is not a bad thing. Now, when you apply that frame in a overall lithium-ion battery and EV ecosystem context, the world has changed quite a bit. So you'll see, 5-10 years ago, and even still, some vehicle OEMs and others have had a big focus on reuse. We recently did a battery recycling day for Lifecycle. We hosted our own, and we had a panel on electrification of transportation. We had somebody from GM there who we work closely with. It's interesting to hear his perspective. His name's Pablo Valencia. And what he talked about was, even for them, historically they had looked at reuse as a way to, one, deal with end of life packs and, returns coming back in warranty, but even their own thinking has started to transition in terms of the need for recycling. And part of that is there's a couple of sides of the coin. I think there's three things in summary. One is battery prices have fallen the way they have and will hopefully continue to. There's an economic case and decision being made between a reuse of a battery and buying a new one. And if I were to present you with a car and I said, well, this one's used and that one's new, and everything else is potentially the same except for the fact that one is used, then what would you choose, right? If they had the same price. So that's the sort of thing that's playing out in the market. Not so much yet, but it's going to start happening more and more and more. So that's number one. Number two is, from a reuse business perspective, it's difficult. You have many different SKUs. That's why I was referring to the tonnages, that if I just sit in our warehouses, the amount of different materials we see coming through, how are you going to be connecting, different building blocks into a product, right? This is a challenge at scale. And third and lastly, what I was getting at in terms of that GM comment is the need for the critical materials. So I think as we get into this phase of tightness in these markets, and it's sloshed around, this is what's happened the last 10 years, but this is now, in my view, a sustained run that we're going to see. And it's going to be chunky in terms of the way that supply and demand play out. But the demand side is very different now. There's a huge focus on getting those materials back. Mm-hmm. And so the corporate priorities, and then that links into bringing down the carbon footprint of the battery and other environmental aspects of the embedded emissions in the vehicle and the EV. All those priorities are playing out. So the market has shifted a lot. Every conference we're at, always a question, always riles up a big debate, but that's our perspective.
Yeah. AJ, I've got a similar perspective. I think second use made a lot of sense back when batteries were $1,000 or even $500 a kilowatt hour. But batteries today, new batteries, are less than $100 a kilowatt hour in volume. They're even less than that. So you have this price coming down on the batteries, and at the same time, you've got a market that's developing for used or spent batteries, that the price is actually going up and increasing. And in the middle there is second life. So you're essentially being squeezed by the raw materials and the value that is inherent in these spent batteries, as well as the new batteries that are coming out that are lower and lower cost. So will there be some applications for second life? Yes. I don't see it being wide scale, though.
Good discussion here. Any other thoughts on secondary life? If not, we're going to move.
Okay, I just want to quickly add my personal opinion.
Yes,
I think
please.
Secondary use is totally different from recycling. I don't think a secondary use should be in the recycling, topic, because in the end, if you think about battery, secondary use battery can be regarded as a waste battery after several years, even they do secondary use. So I think in their individual topic, although people are always putting secondary use and recycling together for cost mitigation something, but in the end, I think this is a totally different topic. Yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah.
Thanks, Jen. We collect a lot of questions regarding the battery chemistries, about the recycling of, for example, like sodium-ion batteries, LFP, and also people asking about manganese-rich cathode systems. How our panelists, I will just combine all these questions together as one big question. How do you think right now are the possible solutions and different strategies on these different chemistries?
So I guess I'll start.
Sure.
As there's lots of different chemistries for batteries for different applications. It's almost like an alphabet soup when you start talking of LFP or NMC, NCA, LMO. It's just an alphabet soup. So we've been dealing with this for a while. I think it goes back to, there will be technologies that can extract, if there's something valuable in that battery, we'll be able to extract it. We have methods and technologies today, and it's not only battery resources, it's a lot of the recycling industry or anybody that's able to extract these metals. So that will continue to happen. And I certainly expect chemistries and different battery materials to evolve. Lithium metal is coming. Larger amounts of silicon in the anodes is coming. Solid state is coming. These are all new materials. They will all one way or another be recycled. And as they start coming back into the recycling supply chains, you have to have a process that's flexible enough and capable enough to handle all of these materials. So we have a view, a longer range view on where all these materials are coming. The sodium ion batteries is another example, not in full scale production anywhere, but there's still valuable materials in there. And the way to extract all those and to make them into high valuable materials, that's something that will certainly be developed. We already have techniques and technologies today, but perhaps they're not in commercial scale. It's a matter of scaling that technology up. So certainly I believe the recycling industry will be able to handle all of these new materials.
Cool. Yeah, it will be very interesting to discuss. Right now the chemistry as well as solid state, if we have sulfide-based different chemistries coming up, we still have the solution to the right recycling. We have a question which I think is pretty interesting, is that what is CO2 carbon dioxide carbon footprint of different recycling methods? I think today we discussed pyro, hydro, and some direct recycling. How do our panelists look at the different carbon footprints?
I can start on this one. I can share our LCA, frame of reference, and we look at it versus primary material. We look at it versus other recycling types. Versus virgin on a unit basis, we measure per ton of lithium-ion batteries, and of course, there's many different ways to do the virgin LCA. But on a per ton weighted average, different input, and what we're saying, I'll comment on also relative to other recycling, but I'm going to start with versus virgin. Depends on your frame reference, but say it's circa 6.7 roughly tons of CO2 equivalent emissions for every ton of batteries that comes to us. Our footprint is more like 1.7, all things considered. And to Alex's point, when you do the full LCA, you have to consider reagents and their footprint and downstream and upstream of us, and transport and everything else included. So the net offset per ton of batteries is about 5 tons of CO2 equivalent per every ton of batteries. LCAs are difficult because you have to do apples to apples. Our estimates for pyro, and I have one more comment on just different types of recycling in a moment. So that's at least 30% more efficient in terms of the emissions offset. So meaning we can reduce 30% more relative to a less efficient or recovering approach. We're in the process of actually updating our LCA because there's been a bunch of new information, so people can stay tuned for that. Just last comment I have on just trying to compare recycling. I think many people in their heads, just like it's human nature, thinks recycling is all one thing. It's very important to segment into pre-processing and post-processing. So pyro should actually be compared to mechanical, typically. And you can also use pyro for downstream, for post-processing, meaning intermediate product to downstream. But just really important, and that's where the apples to apples becomes a little bit difficult.
I agree with you. I think it starts with, what do people define as recycling? To a lot of people, just taking batteries and throwing them in a smelter is you just recycled it. It's no longer a battery. It's turned into an alloy, or you burned up the carbon and the electrolyte. So is that recycling? And then are you done? Or if you're doing this mechanical shredding process, it's no longer a battery, so therefore is it recycled? I certainly think about it much, much differently. And when we do our LCAs, and we did not really think about ourselves as a recycling company necessarily. We are a battery materials company. And so we look at our end product, which is cathode, and we compare the LCA of our cathode material to an alternative way of making that cathode, which is the traditional way of making it from mine sources. The carbon footprint is dramatically different. It's night and day. And so really, like I said, if you are recycling materials, it's a net positive. You're reducing your CO2 footprint because you're starting with so much more of a concentrated source of the materials. But then going directly and through a very efficient process, you can even get to a net zero carbon process for making cathode material. So the way we define it, and again, you have to put your box around it. What is recycling? What is the entire process that you're doing or practicing? And not all processes are the same. Just AJ, you had mentioned that. You have to define what is it, and then you have to get to how do you actually compare these different processes or technologies. We consider our process more of a hydro to cathode process, and nobody else really does and practices our process. But there are other techniques for hydro and pyro and so they all have their CO2 footprints as well. But so I think the first question here before you can answer what's the CO2 footprint is you have to define what's in the box. What is recycling?
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Any other thoughts from our panelists? Yeah, I think we got a very good question for, I guess this is for Amanda. So mining industry is pretty dominated by governments and monopolies. How could startup and entrepreneurs break in? Also a good question for Laurie.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have to really understand the systems that are in place today and understand where they came from. Like, why do the government policies exist the way they do? Why were they put in place in the first place, and respect them? But then at the same time, challenge the governments to change policies in the face of new technologies and new development opportunities and looking towards a more green future. And so I think it's about, I want to say education, but I don't want it to sound derogatory to governments or different countries. We need to educate, but at the same time, respect where they came from, just to make sure that they really understand what the opportunities are before they put policies in place and support or don't support certain operations. So lots and lots of conversations need to be had. And I think that that's the best place to start, just talking, and really understanding why we're trying to push new agendas and create new policies.
Cool. Thanks, Amanda.
And maybe just to add on the monopoly topic, of course, the mining industry, I mean, there are lots of old corporations that are dominating the space, which is very similar, for example, to the agriculture industry. And that's where I think there is an opportunity for entrepreneurs and startups, because those companies are much more flexible. They come with a different mindset, sometimes a different expertise, where you can combine maybe software expertise, robotic expertise, everything together that the mining industry doesn't have right now. And I think that's how we can innovate and disrupt this industry and develop solutions that are going to have better unit and environmental economics. So I'd say it's a tough industry to break in. At the same time, there are lots of opportunities to innovate. So yeah, I'd love to see more entrepreneurs in the sector.
Love that input. Thank you, Laurie. Yeah, we have more questions piled up. But speaking of the time, I actually want to ask each of our panelists to deliver one message to our audience. Because in our audience, they're entrepreneurs, they're investors, they're academia researchers. So think about one sentence that you want to bring up to the table, and then one message that you want to deliver to our people. I'd love to start with Mike.
Sure. At Battery Resources, we are focused on high value, sustainable materials. And we believe that is really going to drive increased recycling rates, and it's also going to help the overall sustainability of the battery ecosystem.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think it's a good, glad to see companies like Battery Resources, Lifecycle is making a lot of efforts here. Yeah, how about other guests? Anything that you want to address attention from our audience, or people, there might be people from a government come to join our today's sessions. Any inputs you want to add at our last several minutes?
I can go next. Just two things. I mean, just in recap of who we are. Lifecycle is a lithium-ion battery recycling company, commercially processing lithium-ion batteries today, scaling rapidly. So that's us, and we're growing in lockstep with the supply chain. However, the message I wanted to say for the audience, just from a higher level, is I think we're in a time where it's the return of the hard assets, and deep tech, I think was the term said before, hard tech. These businesses are not easy. They take a lot of building, and it is long lead. I do think sometimes on investment horizons it's a little incongruent, but all of this build out, it takes time. Now, in the case of us, we're growing with manufacturing scrap. We can generate near-term return. That's fine, but that's not, the prize. The prize is ultimately scaling these supply chains, getting to those larger orders of magnitude. And this needs cross supply chain effort, and none of these things are easy. So if you're an entrepreneur doing that, that's fantastic. Keep pushing. And I'd say from an investment perspective, there's huge return, of course, long-term that can be made here, but these are different investment cycles. This is the traditional NPV curve that goes like that, but it stays as time goes on. This isn't the soft tech that happens on the NPV curve. So I just want to emphasize that, but it's a challenge and it's an opportunity.
Great.
I love that you said that, AJ. One of my favorite mentors always said, nothing worthwhile is easy. So that we do the hard things because they need to be done. The message I would want to leave, like Summit Nanotech, we're extracting lithium from the ground using sustainable technology. And the message I want to leave just for the audience is that we all as a species have to have systems level thinking and support each other through this. It does take a long time and it's not easy, as AJ was saying. And just being able to redefine what the bottom line is. Like the bottom line isn't just return on investment anymore. It incorporates in life cycle analysis and environmental impact and social governance and responsibility. And so that kind of bottom line definition and analysis needs to be done for all companies trying to operate in this space. So that's what I would hope to see going forward.
Thank you, Amanda.
I can go next. So our mission at One Ventures is to help humanity become a net positive to nature. And I think we need to address mining, battery manufacturing, battery recycling. And I'd be really excited to see entrepreneurs kind of using big tech as a way to change those industries and develop solutions that have radically better unit economics and environmental economics. And as Ajay said, from a financial perspective, there are ways to have pretty interesting returns. So I hope we will see more entrepreneurs in the sector.
Nice. Thank you, Laurie. We still have Zheng and Alex.
I just want to echo that, it's a good start because we have putting more attention in this sector, but there are a lot of work to be done, and I don't have any advertisement, but I think as scientists, we hope to work together with academia, industry to develop a new technology, understand new science, and pushing the solutions towards real sustainability for the sustainable future. So that's what I want to share at last.
Yeah, that's our goal as well, to gather people together, to work together. Now, Alex, you will be the one to wrap up a summary.
I would say that if you really want to mitigate environmental impacts in the world and improve the environmental performance of the technosphere, one, and two, you're smart and entrepreneurial and have interesting ideas about how to do that type of thing, then mining, mineral, and chemical industries are fabulous places to work in. Partly because a lot of kind of the old guys who wanted to always do it the same way they did it for the last 50 years are retiring. So I think that there's kind of like a technology development cycle kind of golden age upon us in those spaces. And also historically, there just weren't very many smart people in those industries. So there's a lot less competition. If you go to a really overhyped industry like battery recycling, there's a lot of smart people and there's a lot of competition. So there's just a lot of opportunity and a lot of value capture opportunity in mining and minerals. So yeah, if anyone ever wants to chat about that, let me know.
Sure, thank you. That's very encouraging. Yeah, this has been an amazing session, and I think we can all agree that we are living a bit smarter and more excited about the future energy than when we came in. Please let me give a huge thank you to all of our panelists in today's session. It was a great pleasure to have you joining us, and thank you for your deep insights into the exciting world of energy transformation. And thank you to our awesome audience. Thank you for being so engaged and keeping us on our toes with great questions towards the end. For entrepreneurs in the audience, feel free to reach out to our amazing investor, Laurie from @One Ventures, and Alex from JCO Partners, who has a lot of resources in the sector. Our industry partners, especially car OEMs and cell manufacturers, welcome to reach out to Amanda to know more about Summit Nanotech's clean and green lithium extraction technology, as well as Ajay from Lifecycle and Michael from Battery Sources on battery recycling. We really hope the industry will pour more attention and take real actions on building up these closed-loop recycling plants together with battery manufacturers. And our investors' friends, don't hesitate to build a connection with Professor Zheng Chen, who is leading the research in this field and commercializing their technology through Unigrid. Finally, we want to extend our gratitude to our top-tier event partners and sponsors who helped get the word out about Energy Week 2021. Check them out and give them some love if you haven't done already. It's been my great pleasure to host this panel on mining and battery recycling. Today's session ends now, but Energy Week is not finished yet. Our investment director, Anil, will share a summarized report of Energy Week with our key learnings and takeaways in the collaborative events with Energy Innovation Network tomorrow. And then welcome to scan the QR code and register for the event. Finally, I want to take this chance to say thank you to all my colleagues in TDK Ventures. This is a great teamwork and a lot of efforts from everyone to make our first TDK Ventures Energy Week happen. We will continue to devote our passion in energy transformation and deliver our commitments on bringing values to connect energy and clean tech society together to be the hub of investing the future of energy innovation. We welcome you to scan, next page, please, to scan these QR codes to follow us, join us, and together contribute to the engagement on energy transformation for our planet and for our future. If you would like to share about Energy Week, feel free to use the hashtag Energy Week 2021 on LinkedIn. Thank you again to our all guests and audience. We hope to see you again in our next year Energy Week event, Energy Week 2022. Thank you. Bye.